Okay, it was about time that I did another tutorial video because I kinda wanted to start doing this kind of videos like more than a year ago, but then I did like a couple and didn't do anymore because of time mostly. And the reason why I started to wanted to do these tutorials is because I'm kind of tired myself that almost all of the tutorials that you see on the internet are like very basic. Like it's like the people who do them don't really want to teach anything. They just want to have a video made that gives them views, and all of the videos are like 20 minutes, half an hour long, but they say nothing. Like they always spend a ton of time saying the most basic thing that anyone can come up with without help and doesn't help you. Like they say, oh, you have to get better, you have to draw every day, as if that's something that you weren't doing already or wasn't easy to understand. Or things like you have to use reference and things like that. They say things that are like very, first, they're very obvious. And secondly, it's like being told that you have to draw every day doesn't really help you anything. It's like, obviously, you draw every day, but what do you do? So I wanted to do tutorials about specific things. And I started with a tutorial on, I think, on monetization, which is probably outdated already because it has like probably 3 years old. And then I did one about color coding for characters. I will see if I remember to put a link in the description. So now I wanted to do another one specifically about directions in comic, especially in comic, although it can be used in illustration. So what I mean about directions is like where your character is focusing or heading or what they are doing and how that influences the screen, and wanted to give some advice on how to do it better. So the first thing what we have to do is establish the most basic thing. Basically, the way our perception works when we are looking at images is kinda like this. So we look at the things that are first on the top and the things that are first on the left, and we go from left to right. So more or less our vision does this when we look at an image. That is, if we don't have anything in the screen that is specifically stopping us from looking at it this way, which is kind of what comic and illustration does. Like we do things on screen, so you maybe look at a different thing using different methods. For example, like normally, if you were to draw like a character running, like you could do it like the character is, running in this direction because we go from left to right and we look first at the things on the top. Or you could use any other kind of angle, but more or less that direction. Like for example, maybe you do like a top perspective. But you do the character focusing in this direction and from the top, for example, because it's what our eye will perceive more logically. But for example, you could also play with that. And you could, for example, make some guy who has like a shield. And then you could represent that he's blocking someone because he's going in the opposite direction that our eyes usually, so it's kind of deflecting or point of view, and you can kind of work with that. But that is like the most basic idea that Eurovision does this. So when we are talking about comic, we have like what our eyes do is they start from here, but because you have elements that are guiding your eyes towards the right, you will do first this, and then you will go here and do this. So more or less you will do this when reading a comic, unless again you have something that interferes with it and makes you see things in a different direction. No, you're probably thinking that some comics don't do that, especially in manga, but that's because the Japanese read from right to left. So all of the things that I am saying, you have to invert them for the Japanese, because they are going to do the complete opposite as we do. But we are in the West, so we're going to talk about left to right. So how you can make use of this? You can, what I mean is that how can you modify this, so it's not always simply like this. A way to do this is, for example, using mass, because mass of what we call weight, an image that has like a interfering with, like for example, you are reading something here, and then you have a character that is like a big mass, and you have a text here. So your eyes will probably do something like this, because you will be following the direction of the body of the character. So you will do this instead of going first here. You will probably do this. And I have one example here that is more or less does. This is a manga, so it's read from. So normally you will read this, and then you will go here. But what this image does is you have the first text, and then this text over here guides you, because you have another mass, and then you have a big mass of black that is going downwards, and then you will read this first, and then you will go over here. So you are basically using the body of the character to manipulate the direction in which the eye is gonna look. And I have, for example, we have this where we have. Normally you will do this, and then you will do like, normally in a comic will do like that. But instead of going over here, because you have this mass, your eye will go over here, and you will read this, and then this. So that's more or less a way of using directions. And you can also use the balloons themselves can be used for this. Like for example, we have this balloon here, we move here because there's also like a mass of black guiding us here. You see the second, and because you have this here, like Vivart has done this, you start here. So this technically will be like an opposite movement, like for Japanese, because this is, as we have said, they read in this direction. I'm going to invert it so it's easy to see. Okay. So normally you will have to make the image going in this direction, but you have guided the eye first here, So now this thing can do this because you have the starting point of the movement here. And then you go to the top and you have your eye spheres here, then here, and here, and you go doing like where the image tells you to go. So when you draw a comic, you can use, you have to take care of where the balloons are, because if you put the balloons, like for example, let's say that this is something that it pisses me off in memes because people do it wrong, and it's so logical that they do it wrong because people doing memes are not artists and they don't know about this. But for example, you have like a character and you have two texts here, and like people believe that the first text should go here because it's like more in the left, but actually the first text will probably be this one. So you read a meme many times and you read the second part and that is here and it doesn't work. So you will have to take care of moving this as upward as possible, and maybe there's something here that stops you, like you have the hand of the character with a sword of something and you don't want to cover it. And maybe you want to put the balloon here, but you have to put it up enough, like maybe you do an elongated, so people read this first, because if it is too low, people will read this first, and it won't make sense. Because that's people start here and do this, so they will go here. Okay, more things. I think I have used an example of this. Yeah, like for example, a way to do the direction that, like the way that you lead the eyes, one of the things is, for example, the distance between the panels. Like for example, the least distance between two panels, the more people will read that panel first. So you have two panels like this very close to each other, and there's maybe some confusing image. You separate a lot this panel, people will read this first. So maybe, for example, you have, let's say that you have this. And you want people to read first what's here, and then you want them to read first what's here. Normally people, what they will do is do this and do this, so it will be confusing. So if you want them to do this, you will have to separate this panel and then make this panel very, very, very close. And then you will have to do, like maybe the character is saying something, make the panel very low and then panel over here hide, so people do this and then go here. Basically, you have to use the elements on the screen to guide the eye. And Soyo does this a lot with panels, like they have like maybe a panel, but then the rest of the image doesn't really have panels and it's just characters, because Soyo does that a lot of superimposing characters. So what they do is like they add a lot of panels, and the panels guide your eyes. The balloons, excuse me, the balloons guide you wherever they want you to look. So you look at this first, this character second, then this character, and then this character, and something like that. Or you can use like people fighting with swords or whatever. have a sword here. They have some text, and then there is some text here, so you will follow the sword and see this text, and maybe then there is a key, there is another panel, and like you want people to read this first, this second, this third, so you will have to use visual elements to convey that. And there's also another way to do this is with the direction in which the characters look. Like, for example, you could do a comic that doesn't even have panels, and you have a character. The character is looking this direction, and then you have a character here, and you want people to read what is here next, so you do the character position themselves facing completely this direction, and then people will probably read this in the order that you want them to look. But these are kind of more advanced things, like even if I tell you this, probably until you have drawn a lot, you won't think about this naturally. So I'm going to go more for the basics. Characters usually go from left to, when you draw a character, the character usually has to go from left to right. There are obviously exceptions for this when you have more knowledge about it, but the base is that the character goes from left to right. And I'm going to explain first a little what is called the three axes of movement, which is you have the axis of movement left, right. You have the axis that is up and down, and you have the axis that is forward and downward, which is basically going from towards the back or going towards the camera, basically. And each of them kind of different things that they express visually to people. These are things that are unconscious, like you don't look at a comic and you are thinking, oh, this image expresses to me this or whatever. It's just that you see certain things, the same way that colors, we explained it in the previous video that I did, the same way that red color express more aggression and things like that. The directions in which characters move unconsciously give you certain sensations and certain feelings. There are studies about this, about how you show the same thing with different movement in camera, and people understand different things from it. It's a very old. There's a very old tradition of using the positioning and the directions and the movements in theater and whatever. So, for example, movement that is done towards the camera, like let's say, for example, you have the typical superhero flying towards the camera. So this kind of movement expresses power and aggression, like, or for example, a typical fist towards the screen. It expresses kind of more aggression and more of a sensation of power, while going towards something or having something in the background expresses it to be weaker. It's like an expression of weakness. Or being, like, for example, I have an example here of one of my own comics. This character is one of the villains, and she's one of the most powerful characters in the series, but is kind of small, like you can see here. She's kind of small. So to kind of give more of an expression of the power that she has, I tend to use many times perspectives and angles that give that more sensation. So here is close to the screen, and you can see it like way bigger than these characters to represent kind of that she's way stronger. And also I have a little of the going down, so you read this first before this. Some images of her are also like I saw her from downwards to upwards, because a character that is on a higher perspective looking down represents more power and superiority, while a character that is down in a perspective that is from up to down represents to be weaker. So I tend to do these kind of things so I can, despite the imbalance of hate, I can represent more this imbalance of power that they have. Some more things. Yeah, from left to right, usually what represents is the way that humans understand time. Like we understand that going from the left to the right is an expression of progress. Like going through here is what shall be done to progress things and to go with time, and the opposite is we understand as a regression. Like that's why you have like the typical images of evolution always going towards the right, and then if they want to express like a devolution, it goes in the opposite direction. You can see this a lot even in movies, for example, when they represent characters going towards the right, but then they have things going towards the other side to represent an opposite. Like, for example, in war movies, a thing that is very typical is that the characters are walking towards the right, like the soldiers or whatever, and then you can see how there are people being evacuated, like the wounded being injured, evacuated towards this direction. You can see those kinds of things. I think I had some example, maybe. Okay, so what this means is that, for example, let's say that you have, how do we work around this? Because if you have, for example, two characters fighting, for example, one is on the left, one is on the right, like if usually the way that action is represented better is always in this direction, we have a problem because not the two characters technically cannot work on the same direction. Like one of the characters is punching towards the right and one of the characters is punching towards the left. But there are ways to work around it. So what I usually do is I play around with the composition, so the attacks and the movement is always kind of towards the right. So for example, let's say that you have protagonist punching in this direction, and he punches the villain. And then the villain has to punch back. So instead of doing just that, he punches in this direction. What you can do is kind of use the up, down, or forward or downward angle to change directions. Like, for example, you have the protagonist here in the most close perspective, and then the villain is like in this perspective, saying like, "Oh, that didn't hurt at all." And then in the next, you can use the fact that you have kind of twisted a little the perspective to like the next image can be the villain. For example, doing like a slap in the face of the protagonist. And then in the next image you have again the protagonist here, like in the left side, and the villain in his side. And you kind of go on rotating this and using this kind of movements to always make direction go in this way despite the characters being confronted. And I think I have like an example over here. Yeah, this an image from all the comics, and as you can see, it's like the good guy is kind of on the left going towards the camera, and the villain is kind of on the right, but really is doing like an up to down movement. Then the protagonist is doing this kind of movement, and it's kind of towards the camera and up and down, more like in a direction, although you can also see the left to right. Then you see more left to right, and you see how they use the fact that the villain is now in the background to do like this kick that moves left to right, despite the villain being still positioned in the right. And you keep seeing like left to right, left to right. And they keep using like it's all the time like left to right, but also like forwards and downwards. So the movement is always going towards the right, despite being that way. No, why the characters are positioned like this in this way? This is another thing that is kind of unconscious, but the human mind kind of understand that things that go from right to left are bad and a negative, and things that go from left to right are a positive. So traditionally has always been represented that the villains are on the right and the heroes are on the left, and you can play with this to do a lot of stuff. And I'm going to use one of my comics kind of as an example. Whoa, what's this? Okay, so these are the two protagonists of one of my comics, and this character is kind of like, yeah, she's outwardly presented as kind of like the bad one, and she does have like some bad ideas, like it's kind of like survival of the fittest, but it's like outwardly bad, but then she's also like fair in her assessment. So she's not that bad. Like she has bad things, but the way that I represent the characters is kind of like they are nuanced. Like they have good and bad opinions or whatever. So Sarah is the character who's like, if you see it the first time, it's like it will be almost like a villain made with a protagonist. And then this character is the character that outwardly she poses as the good ones. Is like the character that she's like half an angel, and she acts like a Woody Chusus, and she's pleasant with most people, except with this character. But then she's actually a manipulative character, and she has some dark ideas when you find out what her plans are. So I always take care of, in most situations, try to put the character of Sarah in the left and the character of Europa on the right. This is kind of a subtle way of always expressing that this character is really not what the appearance would show. Like the appearance of initial appearance of the show is that this is the bad, this is the good, but it's not as as black and white. So it's not a comic that has a political message. I don't do really like political stuff, but I do play a little with the concept of nuance. Like there are things that people see in black and white, but actually are more nuanced, and there are things about race and things like that in the story. And one of the things I used to play about this is this. Like this character is like the one that you will say, okay, this is the bad one, the antagonist or whatever, and this is the good one. But it's not that simple. And one of the ways to represent it is this. Like this character is on the left, this character is on the right. And I always do this kind of stuff. Like if they have any kind of confrontation, is left to right, Sarah towards the character. This is kind of always how it goes. But then I did kind of more of a play with it, and I did kind of recently. This is closer to. This is more or less the point in which we are now in the story of the comic, and at this point you see how this character has more or less revealed what are her plans, and she has had a lot of fight with this character who has changed a little through the comic, not too much, but a little. And it's a part in which we're doing a flashback to the time in which they two meet each other, and I combine it with pages of them in the flashback and pages of them in the present. So the relationship between them has changed, and the way that you have to see each character has kind of changed. So, for example, you have here that I start with the same as always, the Sarah is on the left, Europa is on the right, and I kind of do this character do the movement from right to left to represent, like I say, like there is more to the character, like. But then I slowly make the character turn from left to right towards Sarah, because this is the part of the story in which the one that will be the villain in the relationship they are having is Sarah. Because this is the part in which they meet, and Sarah realizes, like, Sarah is obsessed with fighting strong people. And she realizes that Europa is strong, and she forces her against her will to fight to the death, basically. So in this instance, Sarah will be kind of like the villain, and then I interchange it with images of the present, and I also make, like, sometimes Sarah is the one attacking because Europa is the one kind of being high and mighty, but then they switch again to Europa being on the left and she being on the right. And this is the last page I have published, so I can't do more pages because there will be spoilers, but more or less what you will see in this fight is that in the flashback, Europa is in the left position facing a Sarah that is on the right. But then when we switch to the past in the present, in which they are fighting as well, it is Sarah the one that is on the left, and she's going towards the right. Because at this point of the story, the good guy, so to speak, is Europa, because we still do not know what her true intentions are. We still do not know that she's manipulative. We just know that she's kind of like an angel that is a nice person, and Sarah is like the villain. But then when time has passed, we understand their true positions. Like Sarah is the one trying to stop Europa from doing something that is a little more darker, and that's kind of like a use of the direction. So these kind of things, like there is a point in which if you do it a lot, you will do it unconsciously, and sometimes you forget. Like there's probably a few pages in which I have done the directions differently, and it's simply because I simply have too much things in screen to worry about, because doing a comic page is a lot of things involved, like space, the text, the directions, the what, a lot of things, and sometimes you may forget. But there will be a point in which you probably have that much experience with this that comes naturally. But at the beginning, I would say that you have to kind of have those before trying to do like the complex things in which you use the look of the characters to generate directions and do oppositions through time like this. You just have to go to like basic things like the good ones are on the left, the bad guys are on the right, and when they fight, you try to use the movement towards the right always, and do like try to rotate perspective, so movement is more or less always in this direction, or if you have to do movement in the opposite direction, you will have first to do something so the starting point of the movement, like people go first, like do balloons, so people move their eyes toward the starting point of the movement, and then the movement goes in the opposite direction, but you have already guided people towards this. So this is kind of this is the basics. Like this is a complex topic, but I wanted to kind of talk about this because it's the kind of things that basically no one talks about it. Like you're doing comics and no one there is no videos about this. There is no one talking about this. Even if you go to a comic class, they won't talk you about this, because I have gone to comic class and they don't talk you about this. Like this is the kind of thing that you kind of notice by yourself at some point, or I found about it more when I studied in my career. I did cinema. So in cinema, they did teach us about this, about the directions and the characters have to work in a scene. But in comic, they never teach me this, which is weird. So yeah, I think that this is more or less like the basics of it, and I think that we can finish it here, and you can take it into account when doing your own drawings. Uh, if you want more videos, you can follow the channel, and I have a Patreon in which I upload, like most of my videos are Patreon only, and I have comics and hentai content in there, so it's my same name is Kukuruyo, patreon.com/Kukuruyo, and basically all my social media are the same name, so you can search me for anywhere, and that's where I am. So goodbye.